Good evening, guys, or good morning, wherever you are in the world. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of being joined by Dr. Max Gulhane. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today, Max.
Hey, thanks, Scott. Great to be here.
You mentioned just off before we start recording that it's been just over a year since you started your podcast and got into this, become the face of, for me, of decentralized medicine and quantum and circadian biology. It's actually been just over 1 year for me since I discovered your podcast. I discovered you through the podcast that you did with Jack Cruz. I listened to the podcast with Jack Cruz and Rick Rubin and Andrew Huberman. And like many people who probably listened to that, I left that podcast with a lot more questions than answers and immediately started to dig into. I already knew who Jack Cruz was from the paleo days back in like the late 2010s. Yeah, early 2010s, I think it is actually. And he kind of disappeared off of my radar for a long time. And then, yeah, popped up on the Andrew Huberman and Rick Rubin podcast. And I was like, okay, let's have a listen to what he's saying because he's talking to Andrew Huberman and I know what Andrew was doing at that time. And yeah, found your podcast and immediately was enthralled with it and just sucked right in because one, the Australian context, most of the podcasts I listen to come from the American context and really resonated and related to me because I live in Australia. And two, you were able to contain Jack's, ego, so to speak, and try to keep him in a narrow band of just talking about some really, really important information and some really, really practical information. And even though it was way too high for me in terms of understanding, you were also able to relate it back to the layperson, which is me. So yeah, I really appreciate everything you've done in terms of your podcast. And like, I've just spent so many hours over the last year listening to you. So that's how I discovered you. So thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for those kind words, Scott. It's been a journey, and I think that we can't, where I am now, we can't really overstate the role that Dr. Jack Cruz has played in this whole movement. And for me personally, delving into this area of decentralized, holistic lifestyle, whatever you want to call it, type medicine, and based on preventative health, based on the real underlying causes of disease, you can't really move past him in terms of someone who's really laid the way for everyone else. And I think that my job and a lot of other people's jobs is simply to communicate what he has basically put down. And that I feel like is the role of science and science communicators and medical medicine communicators is there'll be someone who takes the primary literature, who reads the incredibly detailed, difficult to understand papers and digests it, but they don't fully digest it. They only digest it to a certain degree. Then that's their role. They're fitting in one part of the maybe supply chain or the kind of production chain, and then it takes other people. It takes other people who have a different perspective, who have a unique perspective, who have a different communication style, and who can then take what that person has provided and then further digest it in a way that more people can understand. And I really feel like that is how these scientific and thought paradigms essentially progress and spread throughout society, is a progressive digestion and repackaging and reprocessing of ideas. And I can't remember who said it, but that they said there's nothing as powerful as an idea whose time has come. And I think society and the world, we're ready for these ideas of light as medicine. We're ready for a focus on the mitochondria as the causes and the solutions of chronic disease. We're ready for decentralization and decentralization as it touches every aspect of society. The pendulum is ready to swing back. Cruz is simply just one of many people who are advocating for or bringing forth these ideas, but specifically in his context, in the context of health and medicine. Look, it's a privilege. I feel it's a real privilege to be able to present ideas and have people like yourself listen to them and find value in them, because the reason I started the podcast was that I felt like I could have a bigger impact or a complementary impact to simply clinical consulting by sharing ideas and having them be able to be distributed in such a horizontal kind of zero marginal cost way. And to see that it's helped you and other people is very gratifying and rewarding.
100%. I was already on the path of not the ordinary, like off the ordinary path, and me and my wife were doing things that people scratch their head at. But I have now gone full tilt into that, and people are just like, "You guys are crazy! Like, what are you guys doing? Why are you guys up watching the sunrise? And why are you guys spending so much time in the sun, given the Australian context and the fear that's around the sun?" And I tried to explain, but again, Jack summarized this in a Sarah Pugh podcast I was listening to the other day. I can tell them, and I'm hopefully going to be telling more people about my journey and why I do what I do now. But I'm only doing it for the people who kind of get it. I'm not really doing it for the people that don't get it. And maybe one day those people will get it. But for now, it's just I can only help who I can help. So yeah, again, thank you. You mentioned a lot of things there, like decentralized medicine and stuff, but I want to first start off with you and I call it your superhero origin story. I personally see you as a bit of a colossus. You're a centralized doctor. You work in the Medicare system, from what I understand, but you are also a decentralized doctor and you're working in a decentralized way. So yeah, can you tell us as much as you want to? You don't have to go into any information you don't want to delve into. But yeah, tell me a little bit about you and how you got to where you are right now.
Yeah, so look, I graduated high school and I thought I wanted to do medicine, wasn't 100% convinced, but did a science degree in the meantime and did 3 years of undergraduate science, and then I did a year of lab-based research. So used a mouse model, and these poor little mice had a genetic mutation in a gene that codes for a mucin, which is essentially a mucus or a glycoprotein that gets secreted by the goblet cells in your intestine. What those cells do is they make this mucus layer to protect the intestinal layer from the contents of the gut. And the interesting thing about this, so what these poor mice had is they had a mutation that caused that protein to misfold, and after a certain amount of time of just living their normal mouse lives, they developed inflammatory bowel disease. So it was a mouse model of ulcerative colitis. So we were feeding these mice different diets and looking at how they changed their susceptibility to inflammatory bowel disease. Looking back, we were feeding them a high seed oil, high sugar diet, and that was obviously making things worse. But the reasons why that was interesting for those who followed my more recent work is these are glycoproteins, and the glycoproteins are the same kind of molecules that make up mucus layer. It's like why a fish has slippery scales, but it's also why your blood vessels are able to remain nice and slippery to the red blood cells that are flowing through there. That glycocalyx is also made up of glycoproteins. And what I did is I did this year of research, and then I applied to medicine and moved down to Melbourne and studied an MD down at the University of Melbourne. And this was interesting. I enjoyed it, and it was great. But I had my own health problems throughout that time. And my health problems were acne. So acne vulgaris, it's essentially a skin disease where, as most people will know, you just have these very unsightly, inconvenient, painful, just pimples, eruptions that happen on your skin. It usually happens around puberty, but for me, it really reared its head, after the age of 20. So, I enjoyed medicine, but I wasn't gung-ho on any one particular thing. So I had the opportunity to do a public health year, and public health is really zooming out and looking at health of people from a maybe 20, 30,000 foot view, 10,000 meter view, and that was kind of good because I'm a curious person and I want to understand things really well and from every angle. Doing a bit of bench side research with these mice and understanding molecular biology, and then doing the clinical medicine and then zooming out and looking at the whole population health, that felt right to me. It felt like I'm giving myself a kind of well-rounded education. And then, throughout this process, this acne was getting worse. I'd been through dermatologists, and they'd put me on a prescription of, escalating doses of various medications. And what the medical system and the centralized medical system does is it has protocols, and they essentially involve laddering up medications, either in forms, in dosages, in frequency, and you can, whether it's diabetes or acne, you basically, or anything, hypertension, you're on this stepwise process, and each step adds another agent or another strength of pharmaceutical treatment. Yet the problem with that is, and it's often effective in managing the symptoms or the manifestations of the disease, but one, it's not doing anything to treat the underlying reason why the disease arose. And as long as that happens, then you're not getting cure or remission. You're simply managing a situation. The other significant problem with this approach is drug side effects. And in pharmacology, this is the basic, like the first day of pharmacology that you learn, is that every single drug has a side effect. And that is, that's kind of self-evident or axiomatically true when you realize that we're honed. Mother Nature has really honed our systems, our biological systems, over millions of years. So, and if you perturb the system with some kind of other agent, like there's going to be you push the marble on one side, there's going to be a movement on the other side. And not to say that humans are a mechanistic Newtonian system, but there's always going to be a consequence, is what I'm meaning by that. So I went through this dermatological treatment paradigm, got put on the sledgehammer of acne medications called Roaccutane, and it made me depressed, so I stopped it. So the whole time I'm going through medicine, and I'm doing well, but I'm not. I'm remaining a little bit skeptical and just open-minded at the same time. Around this period of where my personal symptoms were at their worst, I looked at for other options. This is the story that many patients have, whether they get obese and diabetic and hypertensive and they suddenly ask themselves why. And, I came to that position, and it's a rock bottom, so to speak, that you have to, every individual has to find. And then it prompts you to look into the causes of what's going on and help yourself. So I initially found low carb down under and treated myself effectively with a low carb diet and then a carnivore diet, and the acne went away and I felt fantastic. So that was great. And I started working in the hospital and as a junior doctor, and again, maybe thought could have been should I do anesthetic, should I do gastroenterology? But really what I was learning in this kind of decentralized medical sphere was really compelling. And what I did is essentially gave myself a parallel education at the same time as working in medicine as a doctor. And that was really on these topics of how to reverse and prevent disease, chronic disease, at its root. What are the lifestyle determinants? And really it's not a medical mindset. It's actually more of an engineering mindset, because it's simply understanding the inputs into a system and then reverse engineering them. And this is not the way that we got taught in medical school at all. In medical school, we get taught frameworks, like the actual very useful diagnostic frameworks, not to put that down at all. It's very important ways of thinking about disease and diagnostics and yes, management when people get really sick. But in terms of understanding why a system is breaking, that is not emphasized at all. So really it involves a completely different thought paradigm, and what I kind of taught myself is to really think about the human body in as a system that requires certain inputs, and those inputs are actually dictated by evolutionary biology. It's not a mystery what these niches. I call it design specifications. And if you have a Ferrari, a street race car, a Ferrari, Lamborghini, it has specific design specifications. It's got an intended usage, and that is for the track. It's for the road. And then you have a Land Cruiser, 76 series. and it's got high clearance, it's got four-wheel drive, it's got differential lockers, it's got a snorkel. It's got a completely different design specification than that Ferrari. A lot of understanding human health and human health optimization, and therefore disease prevention, is simply understanding what is the design specification for Homo sapiens. And once you can understand those inputs that are required, then you can see how perturbing or disturbing those inputs leads to disease. And healing people is often a process of understanding in what order and what significance those inputs need to be adjusted, and therefore helping people understand that, and then guiding them through the psychology of implementing lifestyle change, which is it's actually the hardest part. Convincing people of the benefit or maybe the science is, I think, sometimes the easy part, but helping support sustained lifestyle change, especially if lifestyle was the reason why they fell sick in the first place, that can be very difficult. Really, I was as an early career doctor and learning all these things, doing a carnivore diet, and I'd done prolonged carnivore, and I think it was up to 9 months or 10 months. I felt my kind of energy was sagging, and I wasn't feeling as optimized as I did when I started it. So it really prompted me to look deeper beyond simply diet, and that's where I came across Cruz's work, because you can't escape his presence on Twitter and YouTube in all these circles. So, since kind of as I get along, I observe people, and I notice that some people are content to sit in an intellectual paradigm and not push any further. That seems to be pretty common. But for me, if there's a question that is new, is novel, isn't fitting into my current frameworks of thought, I have to explore it. It's it's like the emu sticking its head over the sand dune. It has to be. I have to understand it. And look at going into Jack Cruz's work is simply like opening a Library of Alexandria, and just there's shelves of books that you haven't read with all interesting topics. That was my entry point, and I delved down his work, and not even a close to understanding all of it by any means. That's how far ahead he is, but simply understanding the crux of his ideas, that human health and the approach to human health should be built on the pillars or the foundations of the development of life on Earth, which is light and water and magnetism, and the fact that those have to be aligned for life to emerge, and really using that approach, which is fundamentally based on biophysics rather than biochemistry, and apply that to human health. So that this is kind of my journey, and it's been working in centralized medicine or conventional medicine at the same time, and it gives me a perspective, because I'm not the person to throw shade at throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is a range of conditions that are very, very well treated by centralized medicine, and that is especially to do with any type of acute surgical emergency, any type of acute trauma, severe sepsis. All these problems. There's a reason why there's a lot of benefit in using a very, very intensive approach. But what we're not good at is we're not good at diabetes, we're not good at hypertension, we're not good at metabolic syndrome, we're not good at acne, we're not good at polycystic ovary syndrome, we're not good at infertility. These are the problems that centralized medicine has no effective approach to, and the consequence of that is that people suffer both the side effects of drugs that they might not need to be on if they'd had the option of using lifestyle, and they suffer in time, they suffer in disease progression. Every year that someone has an HbA1c, a glycated hemoglobin, which is a measure of how poor your metabolic health, every year that is above 5.7 even, let's be really strict, you're doing damage. And the medical paradigm is so often content to tell people that you can, as long as you're aim for a target under 7, so to speak, depending on exactly what patient we're talking about. And the problem with that is that it tolerates damage, and it tolerates that patient walking towards a stroke, walking towards foot amputations, walking towards blindness. It accepts this culture of mediocrity because it hasn't looked or doesn't include in its thought paradigm and thought framework reversal and what is actually causing this problem. So this is why these chronic disease treatments are so unsatisfactory in a centralized system. And it's also why it's possible to marry both approaches and to still treat people in general practice, which is what the specialty that I'm in, is to treat people acutely and give people all the pharmaceutical treatment options, but at the same time inform them and educate them of the real underlying reasons of their diseases, and simply offer them the opportunity to learn and then implement. Because at the end of the day, everyone's entitled to do whatever they need to do and want to do. And what I see our job as doctors is to simply give people options and give them the informed consent and the risks and benefits of all options, including doing nothing, including using medications, etc. So that's where I got to, which is general practice, which is an opportunity to treat people holistically, to deal with people over their lifespan, to see a whole bunch of different types of people and patients. And that's kind of where I'm at. And I'm looking forward to implementing and helping people with these more decentralized approaches, in the context of the system that me and other doctors are working in.
Thank you for sharing that. So much what you just said then really hit home, like especially the stuff there about informed consent and stuff, and not treating just symptoms, but actually trying to get to the root cause of problems. How I got into this, or why all this stuff kind of struck me, was I have been very fortunate over the last 3 years, like since basically the start of COVID, when my firstborn came into the world, where I had a pretty privileged life where I was able to stay at home a lot and wasn't working long hours as a lot of strength conditioning coaches do. But last February, I stepped back into coaching full-time, so to speak, where I was waking up very early in the morning before 4 a.m., working for 6-7 hours on the gym floor, coming home, training, having my lunch, and then having to do the afternoon shift of looking after my kids. And within about a month, I had graying hair. And for me, I'm like, what is going on here? I am a very fit and healthy human being, and I'm seeing signs of aging, which most people would be like, oh, you're 30 years old, Scott, that's okay. Like my uncle had a lot of gray hair at 30. Like it's kind of, maybe it's just my genetics. But for me, that was more of a canary in the coal mine sort of thing. It was like, right, there's a sign here from my body that I'm doing something that it isn't happy with. And I kind of need to start investigating and taking the steps to understand why this is happening and what I can do to resolve this problem or mitigate this problem. So definitely resonate with the whole getting to the bottom of things and not just accepting the surface level thing. When I spoke to my mum about it, because I was genuinely concerned, she was like, oh, your Uncle David, he went grey at 30. My Uncle David was like more salt than pepper at 30. But my Uncle David used to deliver rolls for a bakery. So he would wake up at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, go to the Rangers Club, because I'm from the UK and we're into our football over there, be at the Rangers Club till 7, 8 o'clock, maybe watch a game. And then it was at night, 10 o'clock, he would go to work and he would drive all around Scotland delivering McGee's roll, which is a lovely, delicious roll. But now that I know it's not very healthy for me, I don't eat them as much as when I go back to Scotland. But yeah, he would be up all night and then he would get home at 9 a.m., go to sleep. And it was just this repeating cycle. And he was breaking the law or breaking the rule of circadian biology and causing a lot of this mitochondrial damage. And this was showing up in his hair. He was essentially going grey early because his body was stealing the melanin from his hair, or something along those lines. That's what I believe it is. And yeah, he was going great. So yeah, I really appreciate you sharing your your journey into this. What is decentralized medicine to you?
Yeah, look, decentralized medicine is is fundamentally the application of clinical treatments and therapeutic treatments by doctors, by trained doctors, in a manner that is related to their interpretation of the scientific literature and their exercise of their training as scientists and as clinicians, and not a reliance on a treatment guideline that has been dictated to by a centralized body. And not to say that they might not employ treatment protocols that have been handed down or passed down from, you know, the European body of hypertension, sure, but that has been filtered through their individual expertise in the specific context of the patient that's sitting in front of them, and using all the nuance and all the care and essentially personalization that individual patient has. It's the opposite of, and sometimes it's useful to define things by its opposite. It's the opposite of simply following a cookie cutter prescribed guideline, treating everyone with, say, a statin when their total cholesterol exceeds some arbitrary threshold. Decentralized medicine is that, and I think that any paradigm change in science essentially starts in this decentralized way, and then it propagates through a system, and then it gets reflected in the school of thought. But the point behind centralized and decentralized medicine, and why is there even a distinction? And I think that is because the treatment protocols that the most of medicine uses have been influenced and essentially to a large degree co-opted by the pharmaceutical industry. That their influence in medicine, and it begins all the way in the universities and then in medical school education, gently nudging in a way that none of my colleagues, or not the vast majority of my colleagues, have no concept of, towards a bias towards pharmaceutical treatment and away from understanding those root causes that we talked about earlier in the conversation. And you can go as far back as the Flexner report in the US, which was a report that essentially moved the emphasis of medical schools towards this allopathic drug-based model. And that is what centralized medicine really is. And the problems with centralized medicine is that you lose granularity and you lose personalization to the patient in front of you. That's the problem here. And the patient, and again, because this is what we're in this job for, is to look after you as patients. The patient is getting a bum steer because they aren't getting the nuance and discretion and individual treatment that they really deserve. So that's kind of my breakdown of this decentralized and centralized medicine. And really, evidence-based medicine, which is this academic concept that came in, I believe it was the early 2000s, which was this idea that the doctors should take the best available clinical evidence. In the hierarchy of clinical evidence, there's basically a pyramid at which the top sits systematic reviews and meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials. All the way down the bottom is, clinical opinion and case studies and these types of things. So there's a hierarchy of evidence. The point about the original point of evidence-based medicine is that this evidence was used in the context of the clinician's best opinions about how the patient in front of them. But along the line, through whether that's through this pharmaceutical influence, whether it's through especially in the US, risk of litigation, we've simply ended up at these very much cookie cutter treatment protocols. And like I said, the people are missing out because they aren't getting as personalized care as I believe they should be, and a lot of doctors possibly can. And there's so much in this. I mean, that's a kind of framework or conceptual way of thinking about centralized and decentralized medicine, but it's also shaped by society. It's shaped by the billing systems like Medicare, and it's shaped by, in the US, the insurance payment models. It's shaped by all these other factors that are really at play here. Yeah, that's how I think about it. And a big facet of decentralized health or decentralized medicine is simply interventions that can be implemented by people like yourself, Scott, by anyone who has understanding of these fundamental lifestyle inputs. Not to say that if you don't have a red flag symptom or you're really worried that you shouldn't go see a doctor, of course you should. But for simple things that to do with health optimization, the beauty of a decentralized approach is that these lifestyle teachings can be implemented and be passed on by people that even don't have of a MD or MBBS degree.
It's listening to some stuff about Rockefeller and how he started to influence the medical system in the early 20s, 30s, I think it was. It makes you wonder where we would be if he hadn't begun to meddle in the system. I really appreciate you summarizing that. For me, as a strength and conditioning coach, I've always butted heads with gyms because I joined my first CrossFit gym back in 2010. And whilst I loved the training model, I could immediately see the limitations of it. And I could see that, it might be in the context of me who's young and healthy, this might be great, pushing this high intensity interval training. But my mother, for example, who has no base level of training, is very deconditioned, has spent the last 20 years, 30 years since she's left high school sitting at a desk, probably not the best thing to be throwing her into a system where she's got to train as hard as possible with a barbell that's very unforgiving on joints and rotation. And not probably the best thing for her. Gyms, that's not saying that to someone who's come to your gym to do CrossFit or to do weightlifting or strength conditioning, wherever, isn't usually the best result for the gym financially. So you have this kind of mixed emotions, and this you're torn between a rock and a hard place, like whether you actually prescribe them the thing that you're meant to be prescribing them based on the context that you're in, or you give them the best treatment that you can. I'm really fortunate now that at the gym that I work at, I have to coach classes occasionally, just on a Thursday actually. Tomorrow will be my day of coaching classes, but a lot of my training is done personal training, and I'm able to kind of decide the methodology that I use with the person to a certain extent, while still being mindful of the context of the gym that I'm in. You mentioned, you said something earlier, nothing is as powerful so let me rephrase that. Nothing is as powerful as an idea whose time has come. And I laughed because I'm into a genre of music called hardstyle, and it's very aggressive and quite abrasive, and a lot of people don't like it. I learned to love it, and there was a time when I had been introduced to it and I was like, why would anyone listen to this absolute drivel? But one of my favorite songs, which is by a duo, Project One, and it's called Rate Reducer, the Headhunters remix, it actually has that exact quote in it, and I just laughed earlier when you said it. On your profile it says light is medicine. What does that mean?
Yeah, it means that it recognizes that light is one of these fundamental, probably the most fundamental input into biology and life. And without light, the life as we know it could not have developed in the way that it has. And if we think about the history of life on Earth over 3-4 billion years, light has been this ever-present input that has shaped the evolution of life, and starting from these single cellular prokaryotic organisms. I mean, they have abilities to recognize light. They have evidence of light receptive mechanisms, and these mechanisms are conserved all the way up to from those prokaryotic or single cellular organisms all the way up to eukaryotes, and then throughout all the whole fungal and animal kingdoms. The light and the fact that there's this dramatic change in light on a 24-hour cycle between night and day was this incredibly important and shaping force on how life evolved. And if you can imagine that, life is going to be adapting to its environment, it's going to make as many adaptations and anticipatory adaptations as possible, then you can see how important light is, because the difference in available energy between night and day, if we're thinking about the photons that are hitting Earth, is huge. It's absolutely massive. And what we evolved is these circadian rhythms, or these internal clock timing mechanisms, to help us not only time everything that we need to do, whether that's sleeping, waking, secreting hormones for digestion, for reproduction, everything. Not only timing those, but also anticipating the changes that are going to occur. Light was even so much further back from food, is fundamental to life. And what the light as medicine term really means is understanding that the different properties of natural sunlight and understanding how they impact our health. And that is essentially one way of thinking about it, is that each of these properties of wavelengths of natural sunlight has a unique biological effect. And it's almost like you can think about a medicine cabinet. You've got all these different medicines. Light is like that, but there's so many potential interactions and biological effects that it's incredibly difficult to necessarily understand all of them, and that's something that we're working on kind of collectively and as scientists. But the reality is that humans, Homo sapiens, are just like the bear gets its trigger to hibernate by the dipping of the sun, lower and lower in the horizon over the season, and dropping in temperature. I mean, so are humans impacted physiologically and biologically by our light environment. It is really, light as medicine is taking that fundamental reality about biology and applying it to reversing disease and optimizing human health. And I mean, we could go a lot of different places, but I guess the fundamental thing for people and your audience to really grasp is that the type of light that we're living under and that we are exposed to today, compared to those design specifications that I mentioned earlier on for the previous million years of primate evolution, have changed radically. So it's almost as if, again, thinking about, you've been driving your car on smooth bitumen for a million years. That's what it was designed for, and then suddenly we've taken a detour onto a potholed, rough, unsealed fire trail. So that's one way to think about how radically changing that our light environment has, and that has consequences, and that has health consequences, because the light that we were adapted to, that we evolved to, is not currently the light that we're all living under, and it's making people sick.
There we go. Yeah, 100%. I personally have felt it. I went to Vietnam probably 8 weeks ago now, 2 months ago, May. Yeah, and at the beginning of March, whatever that is time-wise. Whilst I was away, with knowing what I've learned through your podcast and many other podcasts, I made it an absolute priority to see the sunrise every day that I was away, because I wasn't having to wake up and work and stuff like that. And something that my wife kind of realized while we were there is she looked at all her aunties and uncles who used to be quite healthy and robust and skinny, essentially, and had frames that looked like just healthy human beings. And they are all a lot fatter than they used to be. And the observation that I made was, well, what's different about their environment now from the last time you were here, which was 11 years ago? The food's the same. The things they do are all the same. They still drink. Some of them still smoke. But they all have iPhones in their hands now. They all are up late at night under LED lights. And yeah, that's from what I've learned from your podcast. It was the first observation that I made. If nothing's changed in terms of the food and all the other things they're doing, which is what we usually use in a in a strength and conditioning point of view. It's like, all right, what's your nutrition intake like? What's your activity level like? And let's see how we go there. Why are these people fatter in your opinion? Like, why would that be the case?
Yeah, it's a great way of, it's an illustrative point. The debate that gets, I guess, really talked about is to what degree, what is driving this obesity epidemic? What is driving this chronic disease and metabolic disease epidemic? Dr. Jack Kruse calls people food gurus if their paradigm of thought is exclusively related to food. And they would suggest that, it's the diet, and the best or the most, I think, advanced food guru position is that it's the seed oils, and they're specifically referring to the massive expansion of these polyunsaturated omega-6 oils that are derived industrially from oil seeds. So things like sunflower, canola, grapeseed, safflower, corn, soy, and they're basically industrially distilled and purified and refined, and they have replaced animal fats as the chief kind of source of fat in our diet. And it's true. I mean, if you look at the composition of food as a proportion, those oils have increased massively. But if you think about, again, the inputs into the system, that change in terms of introduction of these dietary factors, and look, as well as the increased consumption of ultra processed foods, that change, that delta is nowhere near the magnitude of change of our electromagnetic environment, and specifically the fact that we went from living, especially prior to the late 1800s when the electricity grid was developed, living in full spectrum sunlight during the day, getting all these wide range of visible and non-visible light, and then having darkness at night, or maybe a bit of candlelight at night. That was the norm, and that was very much respecting our circadian biology and our need for light and dark cycles. I give the analogy of a yin and yang, and yin and yang, for those who obviously would know about, is there's a white with a dot of black, and it's in perfect harmony or synchrony with a black. The yin and yang symbol in Taoism implies duality, and that is really the way that we need to think about circadian biology. The duality of circadian biology is both incredibly full brightness, full spectrum sunlight during the day, and the complete absence of light at night. That's what we need for healthy circadian biology. So it's not enough to simply block blue light at night, but simply stay indoors all day during the day. And conversely, it's not enough to go outside during the day and get all that full spectrum sunlight, but then blast yourself with artificial light at night. You need to really address both arms of the yin and yang, both aspects of this dualistic system. So how that relates to what I was mentioning earlier is that what has changed more than the food is the fact that we've uncoupled our lifestyles from these key dualistic light-dark cycle. That is a great, and then we've also added in non-native sources of electromagnetic radiation, from Wi-Fi to 4G to 5G to Bluetooth to radio waves, that we never had before. Yes, there's been an increase in the linoleic acid content of the diet, and increase at a population level of refined foods, but that is nowhere near the magnitude and the importance of lighting up our night skies with light pollution, with looking at iPhones and these devices that emit narrow band isolated blue light after dark, and the fact that people are indoors for the duration of their daytime. 89% of their time was one US study in 2000, and I believe it was the early 2010s, that surveyed people and looked at their habits, their lifestyle habits, and it was something like 89%, and it went up to maybe over 90 when you include car time. So that is all time that people are under filtered light or artificial light, and that is a radical departure from what was ancestrally the norm. So how that is relating to your families in Vietnam is that when we're exposing ourselves to blue light at night, this drives incredibly hypoglycemic, so raising our blood sugar and raising our blood insulin level, and it does that in a way that doesn't require any food to be consumed. And there's a variety of mechanisms by which that happens. If you just imagine that darkness is a time for the body to rest and recover, and is the time where the body's expecting no food to be put in the system, but yet we're shining ourselves with a daytime midday signal in the midsummer daytime signal that drives satiety. It drives it raises our cortisol level. It tricks us into thinking that we need to be looking for food when we're supposed to be resting and recovering, and it confuses these circadian clocks in our metabolic organs, in our pancreas, in our fat tissue. It causes leptin resistance, and leptin is this hormone that helps regulate our body's energy metabolism and how much energy we have on board. And so when you're essentially disabling or breaking the fuel gauge in the car, it makes you pull into every service station and try and fill up the tank, even if the tank's already full. And that is what this circadian disruption, this blue light exposure at night, is doing to people like your relatives. And it's causing obesity, it's causing metabolic disease, even above and beyond the food, which is making it worse. Yes, it is definitely making it worse. But I would argue, and Dr. Jack Kruse would argue, is that the genesis of the problem is existing or begins in our disordered light environment and circadian disruption.
Yeah, 100%. We've definitely divorced ourselves from that night and day cycle. Sorry. I've noticed it as well. Like, now that I've become hyper aware of these things, I used to spend hours on a weekend sitting up playing the PlayStation whilst my son was in bed, and would wake up on the Saturday morning groggy, the Sunday morning groggy, and then try to get myself back into my usual routine on the Monday morning and wonder why it's taken me until Tuesday or Wednesday to start to feel my normal self again. Nowadays, I actually played my PlayStation for the first time in about 4 months on the weekend, and I woke up on Sunday morning. I was just like, it's actually not fucking worth it anymore. Like, it just doesn't. I know the negative consequences, and it doesn't fill me with the joy that it once did. So I probably just need to not bin my PlayStation, but just have it sit there as a relic. We talked about leptin resistance, and like, this is one of the things I really want to get out of you is, in my world, we always talk about insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance, and people are getting diabetes. Their blood sugars are too high and they eat too much carbs and stuff like that. From what I've learned, leptin resistance precedes insulin resistance, and it is a hormone that is governed by the circadian biology. How do we get back to having leptin sensitivity and being circadianly aligned, essentially? Like, how do we get back to there? So I wanted some practical tips, like how does someone who has a dysregulated circadian rhythm, how do they get back to being circadian aligned? And then, like, if they are someone who's overweight, what is leptin? And you kind of mentioned that it's like this thing that measures the fuel on the body. How would being circadian aligned allow them to get into optimal health and essentially, for me, in my world, lose body fat and look sexier naked?
Yeah, it's a great question, and to understand or frame it, we have to talk about hormones and how they govern and shape metabolism. And essentially, the two hormones that we've mentioned are leptin and insulin. They have distinct roles, but they're both the two, I guess, key players in regulating metabolism. I'll talk about leptin first, and essentially, it's a hormone that gets secreted by our fat tissue. So it gets made in the fat tissue, and then it essentially ports and signals into the brain, the hypothalamus, at nighttime to inform the body about how much energy stores are on board. And when we're leptin sensitive, it means that our that signal from the periphery, from our body, there's a high fidelity signal. So we know exactly how much energy is on board, and that allows us to influence our food seeking behavior and our satiety correctly. We're not going to our brain isn't going to tell us that we're hungry if we have sufficient fuel on board. That is what is someone who is leptin sensitive, is they're going to have correct hunger signals, they're going to have appropriate hunger signals, and they're not going to be searching for food at the wrong times, excessive food at the wrong times. So leptin sensitivity is a key facet to metabolic health. When this system starts breaking down, and when this leptin process or the signaling becomes dysregulated, then we become leptin resistant. Leptin resistant is that state of not really understanding what, or not having efficient and clear cues about hunger. This progresses to a state of insulin resistance. Look, there's many different ways of actually getting to insulin resistant from this leptin resistance state. Everyone's ability or predisposition or predilection to developing insulin resistance and leptin resistance is a function of their biology, their genetic makeup, their epigenetics, all these different things. And what happens is that when this metabolic system starts getting derailed further, then this is when we can become insulin resistant. And insulin is another hormone, but it's not secreted by the fat tissue. It's secreted by the pancreas, and it's secreted in response to different foods being ingested. And the role of insulin is to assist in the uptake of glucose from the bloodstream into the cells to help power all kinds of cell processes. And the ways to get insulin resistant traditionally, or that you mentioned briefly, is this idea, especially in the food kind of guru spheres, which is called the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity. And what that dictates is that the reason why we get insulin resistant and obesity is because we intake dietary carbohydrates, we demand our pancreas to secrete insulin, and if we do that on a long enough time scale repeatedly, then our body essentially needs to produce more and more insulin to get that glucose into the cells. We become less responsive to it, and that is it, like peripheral insulin resistance. So our liver and our fat tissues, they become less responsive to insulin, and therefore we have to secrete more. And then when you're secreting when you have a heap of insulin lying around, and it's not able to get glucose into the cells, then you start on your way to type 2 diabetes, which is essentially your blood glucose starts climbing because your body's so insulin resistant that it can't control the blood glucose in your system. So the reason why that I raised the carbohydrate insulin model is because it isn't fully able to explain situations of people who develop type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance without necessarily eating a whole bunch of carbs. Yes, the seed oils can generate insulin resistance on their own, but really, if we're taking it back to the light story, then the disordered light environment and this chronic blue light exposure is sufficient to cause to raise insulin and therefore contribute to insulin resistance. The way that the circadian biology ties into all of this is that both insulin and leptin are integrated into our body's like total body metabolism state by circadian biology and influenced by our circadian rhythms. What that means is that if we're up late at night, if we are doing shift work, if we're jet lagged, then both our insulin sensitivity, our leptin sensitivity, and our satiety, our hunger cues, are all chaotic, and they're all become disordered. So our threshold for developing leptin resistance and insulin resistance is massively lowered if we're not getting the correct light signals, which is the morning sunrise, full spectrum sunlight during the day, including ultraviolet, and then seeing the sunset, and obviously preserving darkness at night. If those fundamentals don't exist, we're going to get metabolically sick, and we're going to get these disturbances in these two key hormones. what that means for someone who is overweight and wanting to lose weight is that really fixing these light signals should be the first thing that we do. And yes, food comes after that, and in fact you can change them both at the same time, but really correcting these light signals is going to be the first step into rescuing, becoming more leptin sensitive, so therefore your body knows what it's dealing with from an energy balance point of view, then putting to progress towards accessing that fat tissue and becoming more insulin sensitive as well. So what that looks like is simply starting the day with a sunrise. Get that light information into your eye and help regulate your metabolic state, because those light signals, they travel from the eye to the hypothalamus, and that's where they influence our body's leptin state and our body's ability to remain leptin sensitive. So see the sunrise, and then throughout the day get UV light, get full spectrum sunlight on your skin. There's been studies showing that mouse studies showing that simple narrowband UV exposure to mice confers resistance to obesity. You can feed these two mice the same junk diet, but you expose one to UV and one not, and the UV exposed mice don't get fat. So there's a role here that light plays in providing energy to our systems, and if we're insufficient or we're deficient in light, then your body's going to try and make that up in food calories. So get those light signals throughout the day, and then when the sun goes down, really you have to respect our innate desire or our innate need for darkness. Turn off the lights, turn off the overhead LED lights. If you have to have lights on, use warmer lights that don't contain these isolated blue wavelengths, so things like these red bulbs, salt lamps even, close to the ground, and wear things like blue light blocking glasses, because they are protecting your most critical circadian information gathering system, which is your eyes, from these incorrect, highly damaging, disturbing and chaotic artificial light signals. That's a way to think about it, is if you're overweight and if you're insulin resistant and diabetic, you've got a light problem first and foremost, and you can start healing by first correcting the way your relationship with light. And we talking about fat loss, we can throw in things like cold and obviously exercise, specifically high intensity. That's all part of the mix, but really the emphasis to start with, the most fundamental root cause fix for metabolic disease, which is itself a version of mitochondrial dysfunction, is fixing that light environment, as I've mentioned.
Yeah, 100%. Like for me, like the paradigm that I live and operate in at the present moment is eat less, train more. But when you take your foot off those pedals, the first thing that happens is you get fat again. And I've seen that in myself. Like if I'm not training, I've now got 2 children. I don't have 4 hours to train the way I used to. So I've prioritized over the last 12 months, seeing many sunrises as possible, spending as much time outdoors. I only get to maybe do 45 minutes of training a day, some days more. But I'm in probably just as good physical condition now as I was when I was training 3 or 4 hours a day. But my light environment wasn't as good, but I was making up for that deficit by doing as much training and watching my food. You've got an amazing course. My wife did it. It was the circadian reset. Can you tell us a little bit about that first before we move off from circadian biology? Because maybe someone wants to go a little bit deeper. They want to know more about this.
Yeah. So if you're interested in understanding or the practicalities of how to put in place these lifestyle changes to protect your circadian rhythm, and I go over that, and it's not a long course. There's only about 2 or 3 or 4 hours, but it explains the how and why of red lights, of the crazy glasses, of all these seemingly odd things that we do, but we do it because we care for our circadian biology and our circadian rhythms and how that applies to health. So that's just a real basic course for getting into this idea of circadian health. And it's especially good and appropriate for people who might have been trying to lose weight with a dietary only approach, maybe whether that's been the man shakes or whether it's been, only low carb keto. If you want to get to the root and the bottom of the light contribution to your obesity or metabolic disease, circadian reset is one great way of doing that. So you also join up into my membership group, and we kind of just help talk you through the practicalities and guiding you through the implementation, because I understand that it's difficult to make these changes, especially with family and everything else going on. So it's really just as well as a bit of a support group to, remind you that you're not crazy, and there's a reason why we're doing this, and to kind of support each other.
Yeah, I have to thank you on that front. I obviously introduced you to my wife via your podcast, and she signed up for your first cohort of the circadian reset. And by doing that, I think that was November last year, or was it October? I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, maybe November. Yeah.
November. So I was then given the green card or the hall pass to go to the beach every day. So I have to thank you for that. And working in Bondi, I would, some days, if the weather was nice, before I would head home after the gym, I would sneak to the beach and to Clovelly, which is my favorite beach in Sydney, and jump in and have a quick swim around, just to kind of ground myself and also just reset myself. But I would do it on the sly. I wouldn't tell her. And then she actually caught wind, because my sister-in-law had just given birth not long ago, and she was there one day and saw me, and she was like, "Why were you at the beach?" And she had messaged my wife saying she'd saw me, and I was like, "Shit, I'm in the jail now. I'm in the naughty pen." But after she did your course and she understood it, she was like, "All right, I get it. Go to the beach every day, and actually don't come home unless you've gone to the beach." So I now have a full pass to go to the beach every day and jump in, and I've done that pretty much every day since. So whether it's pissing or rain and the weather's not nice, I work indoors under blue light from 4 a.m. I wear these silly glasses, as you talk about, to kind of soften my light environment. I try to cover up as much as possible. I have my red light on right now. But one of the ways that I mitigate or try to minimize the damage of my environment is the moment I finish work, I head straight to Clovelly, I jump in the water, I swim around for as long as possible. And now that it's winter and it's becoming colder, I'll actually stand in the water until I start to get a little bit of a shiver on. And then I'm like, okay, I've done my cold thermogenesis as well, and let me head home in the car. I'm conscious of time, your time and my time. It's late here, and I'm not sure what time it is there, but you've already given me over an hour. Want to go back to public health, something you talked about earlier on at the start of the podcast. What is the potential damage or like the inappropriateness of the slip, slap, slop, slide sort of mantra that the government's giving us in Australia, and what's that doing to public health right now?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Look, I'll be delicate about it, and the intent behind public health measures is overwhelmingly positive, and it's attempting to have a beneficial outcome on public health. That is what these measures are. But the risk and the problem is that if it's not implemented or it's not done in a way that understands all the pieces in the puzzle, then it has the potential for doing more harm than good. So what slip, slop, slap essentially is, it's a public health measure to reduce the incidence of skin cancers. So melanoma, basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, but mainly melanoma. The reason why that it's been put into place is because Australia, specifically Queensland, has such a high incidence of malignant melanoma, and that's a big problem. And one of the reasons by that is because there's so many fair-skinned people of Northern European descent relocated from an area of low UV yield to an area of dramatically high UV yield. And to illustrate the mismatch, which is what I call a skin type latitude mismatch, is that you just have to compare your skin or our skin to the natural skin color of people who are indigenous residents of the land. And the difference in melanin shows you how much adaptation was required to deal with the harsh Australian sun. So, it's well intentioned, this message about reducing skin cancer, but the reality is that the sun provides a very, very important role in optimal health. It does so through many pathways. One of them is vitamin D and the synthesis of vitamin D through ultraviolet B light. But that is not the only one. Ultraviolet A light, and we didn't talk about the specific light wavelengths, but ultraviolet A, which is 95% of the UV light that hits Earth, that basically relaxes our blood vessels. It allows anyone who has high blood pressure, in many regards, probably has a UV light deficiency because they're not getting out in full spectrum sunlight. So what we know from a range of studies, particularly in Europe, is that women and people who avoid the sun, those people have a mortality risk. They are at higher risk of death than people who seek the sun. And it's been well controlled for confounders, and so there's something about of sun avoidance that is causing or is leading people to die earlier. And in the most recent analysis by dermatologist Richard Weller, who looked at the UK Biobank, over a period of 12 years, that was something like 50 days of extra mortality between the sun seekers and the people who avoided the sun. So it's pretty meaningful, and it's related to an increased risk of cancers, so other cancers, all cancers, cancer mortality, cardiovascular disease, so cardiovascular mortality, and all-cause mortality. What we really need to do is we need to balance, from a public health point of view, the risk and the mortality risk of melanoma and skin cancer against the mortality risk of cardiovascular disease, which is the biggest killer in society, and that's what ischemic heart disease is. In Scotland is as well. I mean, I believe Glasgow was the world capital of heart attacks. Maybe it still is. And there's this risk versus benefit equation to do with sun exposure, and the slip-slop-slap policy throwing out or failing to recognize how key vitamin D and UV light and full spectrum sunlight is for prevention of all these other cancers, of cardiovascular disease, of autoimmune disease, of all these incredibly important illnesses. So it has forgotten about that or thrown that out because its narrow interest or prevention is skin cancer. I like to quote Professor Richard Weller, because he is one of the world's leading academic dermatologists. He lives in, I believe he lives in Aberdeen, or he lives in Scotland, and he wrote a paper, and essentially he stated that despite the fact that ultraviolet light can cause this DNA damage and cause skin cancer, or contribute to in certain situations, and that's another whole topic because we need to talk about artificial light and how that relates to the development of melanoma. And there's a profound lack of evidence that ultraviolet light exposure reduces lifespan. And he makes the point that as doctors, it's not our job. Our job should be the prevention of all-cause mortality, not the narrow prevention of skin cancer. And that essentially is what the slip-slop-slap message has done, is it's focused on skin cancer with forgetting or ignoring that there's this profound all-cause mortality benefit from sun exposure. The nuance that I have to add, because we live in Australia, this is an Australian audience, is that we have to be very careful in building up our tolerance to sun appropriately because of this profound skin type latitude mismatch. But what that means, it doesn't mean slathering on sunscreen and sunglasses. It simply means sun avoidance during peak UV periods. That's essentially what it means. It means titrating your UV exposure to your skin type, allowing you to build up some melanin as a essentially natural sunscreen, allowing you to build up an optimal vitamin D level, and then avoiding midday sun when you have done that. And the beauty of having a paler skin type is that you can generate massive amounts of vitamin D with relatively little amount of UV light. And if the reverse, in Scotland and UK, there's people of Nigerian and West African descent, that is a much more difficult situation to exist in. And if they're avoiding the sun, then they're setting themselves up for metabolic disease, cancer, and cardiovascular disease, because there is simply not enough UV light, even in peak summer, to provide for their needs, because they've got that much melanin in their epidermis. So, my message about sunlight is that it needs to be nuanced, it needs to be done properly, but it needs to recognize that there are these kaleidoscope of profound health benefits from full spectrum sunlight, and blocking them with broad spectrum UV blocking sunscreens, by blocking UV light, by simply avoiding the sun, that is guaranteeing poor health. That is guaranteeing the development of things like cardiovascular disease, because we're deficient in these critical light nutrients that we need to maintain optimal cardiovascular health. And I'll make the point quickly. Vitamin D has profoundly anti-proliferative effect on cells, meaning if you are vitamin D deficient, your risk of any type of cancer goes up. So if you're avoiding UVB light, because that is the same wavelength, UVB, to generate vitamin D as the sunlight that in Australia we're being told to avoid, then you're really setting your body up for uncontrolled cell proliferation, because you're going to be vitamin D insufficient, if not frankly deficient. And then if you pair that with artificial light at night, and you turn off melatonin, which is again a key regulator of apoptosis, which is controlled cell death, then this is a recipe for developing cancer. Avoiding the sun and during the day and getting blue light at night is a cancer recipe. It's a prostate cancer recipe, it's a breast cancer recipe, and it's a bowel cancer recipe, and it's actually a skin cancer recipe too. So that's my message. And we need appropriate and smart sun exposure. We need to build a solar callus, and that's been the focus of my work more recently, which is educating about the people about these nuances and helping them get this sunlight in a way that's appropriate for their latitude and skin type.
Yeah, I remember listening to that podcast with that gentleman, and he was saying that the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, follows Australian guidelines, but environmental context is pretty important, because there is no UVB, especially, and UVA in Scotland and England for the vast majority of the year. But we've got the same public health recommendations being made for the UK compared to the Australia, where we've got UVB all year round here in Sydney anyway. I think right now it's from 10 a.m. till 2 p.m. is kind of when we've got the UVB window. And I know, because I use the Circadian app and try to maximize my sunlight exposure. Last year, after listening to your podcast and stuff like that, I trained nothing but outdoors the whole winter. I just spent as much time as I could outdoors. So I'd get home from the gym at 10:30, 11 o'clock, and I would train, and I'd be outdoors, and I was tanned all winter. And then come this year, my wife and I, we used to love getting up early and going to Clovelly for that UVA window where the sun wouldn't burn us, and we would leave just before it gets to it. But with children, our exit out the door has been delayed significantly. Wherever time we set to leave, it's always 30 minutes to an hour later. So we've been going to the beach this last summer, later and later, not later and later, but just later than we would like to. But I never wore sunscreen all year, and I never burned all year, except from the one time where I'd had a big weekend at parties and doing things that I shouldn't be doing, and I wasn't feeling the best, and I went to the beach, and probably because I had spent an entire evening at a rave, my body was not in the position to deal with the sunlight exposure that I was giving it, and I got a little bit burnt. But compared to previous years, especially rewind all the way back to like 2017, 2018, when I was a weightlifter and I was a bit overweight and I used to eat a lot of KFC and crap, I used to burn every other weekend when I was at that time. So I'm gonna try to wrap this up now. You do actually have a course called the Solar Callus, or Building Your Solar Callus. What does that entail, essentially, in a quick summary?
Yeah, so it really answers this question about how do we get a safe and appropriate sun exposure, and it's mindful of the fact that what you're being told from other more centralized outlets is the complete opposite, and I'm acutely aware of that. So that is why this course ended up being as long as it has, because it's got a massive theory section about the health benefits of sunlight, skin type and latitude. It's about dietary preparation. It's about circadian preparation. It's about medications. There's so many things I've included in this because I really want it to be the most comprehensive pit stop for anyone who wants to get sunlight but might have been told for 30 years to avoid the sun. So it includes a theory, a preparation, and an execution module. And I've got a whole bunch of extras in there. I've got the history of heliotherapy and how that was being used in the late 1800s and early 1900s to cure tuberculosis, and that's really the precedent for building a solar callus. There's a medical precedent for deliberate sun exposure that I really emphasize. So solar callus is the most comprehensive course that exists on the internet for getting sun exposure in this safe way and appropriate way. It's really, my goal is to give people a lifelong skill, and that lifelong skill is to learn how to harness the sun, to live an optimal life, to have the longest health span and longevity and lifespan, and to learn how to optimize things like your vitamin D level and ensure that you're always going to be at the lowest risk of chronic disease. So I'm almost about to finish releasing the last couple lessons, but it's turned into quite a mammoth undertaking, and there's going to be over, I think, probably about 15 hours worth of lessons by the time I finished it. So I'm very proud of it, and I think there's some pretty groundbreaking stuff in there, and there's some analysis that I haven't seen anywhere else. Not to blow my own trumpet, but this is the nuance that we need if we're going to help everyone, no matter what your skin type is, no matter what your latitude is, to harness the health benefits of the sun. So that is solar callus. I'm going to be releasing a couple of the theory lectures on YouTube. I've just released one recently, so if anyone wants to watch one of the first lectures, go to my YouTube and watch that for free. I'm going to be releasing a couple more to give you guys to a real understanding and of framing of what we're why we're doing this. But it's all available through my website, and I support people with the course material on my private school group as well.
Well, thank you very much, Max. I really appreciate your time. The reason why I wanted you to be the first person on my podcast was because you've inspired me to start this podcast. I previously had a podcast years ago when it was just on weightlifting, and it was very narrow band, wasn't helping many people with their overall health. But I just want to talk to people like yourself who have really inspired me and informed me about this decentralized model, quantum and circadian biology. We didn't even get into the quantum realm too much today. I just really wanted to focus on light. Just to kind of summarize some of the things you've said. Get up in the morning, watch the sunrise as much as possible, expose yourself safely throughout the day as much as possible, not only in the middle of the afternoon when the sun is strongest at Clovelly and you're going to get burnt, but we want that UVA rise, so we want to be that early window when the sun is very low to the horizon but past sunrise, and then also throughout the day safely. You can do that by maybe being under some shade or in some trees or something like that. And then also the sunset is also important for helping your circadian rhythm. And we need to go back to the point where we are no longer divorced from our night and day cycle, but we embody it. Get as much light during the day as possible, and then minimize artificial light as much as possible at night. Our days are darker than they used to be because we spend up to 90% of our days indoor, and our nights are much brighter than they've ever been because we've got so much artificial light, whether that's from your iPhone or from the computer screen. And ways that we can mitigate that are some sexy sunglasses or blue blocking glasses and some low EMF, low blue light light bulbs. Would that be right?
Fantastic. Great. Very, very good summary. And as you mentioned, Circadian Life app and DMinder are two really good apps for people to download and to start playing around with to help this circadian lifestyle.
Perfect. Max, I can only say my words of praise and gratitude for everything you do, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. It was a pleasure.
Your Instagram is?
So Dr_Max_Gulhane. And we've got a health summit happening in August. If people want to learn from people, it's called Regenerate. Like my podcast is regenerative health, so that's a kind of extension of that idea. If people want to learn about from people in person about this and connect and meet up and enjoy delicious barbecue lunches of really high quality regeneratively raised beef, then come to Regenerate. It's in Albury, New South Wales on the 3rd and 4th of August. And you can also watch remotely the two-day conference. If you can't make it in person, you can watch it from a live stream ticket. So yeah, come along to that and meet me and say hi. And then, yes, as I said, my podcast is Regenerative Health Podcast on all the podcast platforms. And yeah, my YouTube channel, Max Gulhane MD, where the podcasts and other videos get posted.
I think my wife has been in contact with you. Me and her were discussing whether we were going to come down together, but we've got 2 young boys, and a full day of them maybe being outside a little bit and then coming indoors probably not the best thing for them. So it's probably looking like I'm going to come to Regenerate by myself. So I'm looking forward to meeting you in person then.
Very good, epic. Well, I look forward to that, Scott. It's going to be a great weekend. So yeah, very, very, very good.
Thank you very much for listening, guys. All of Max's links will be put into the bio or the description of this, and look forward to the next episode. Have a good day.